All right, we are live. Good evening to all our viewers. I would like to invite you and welcome you to a next episode of Safari Talks, brought to you by the African Bush Camp. So my name is Sechaba Gqeba. I am going to be facilitating. I've got a panelist of people who are in the tourism industry specifically, who will give you sort of a professional perspective of where tourism is headed in the next couple of months, possibly years. We're talking the future of travel and tourism post-COVID-19. So I'm going to introduce our panel. I'm not one person who's going to give a professional perspective, but I'm here to make sure that the questions flow. So if you have any questions, please make sure that you send them through in the live comment sections. So we've got three individuals. We've got Beks Ndlovu, who is the African Bush Camp's founder and a professional safari guide. We've got Juliet Kinsman, who is a hotel expert and founder of BOUTECO. We've also got Nigel Vere Nicoll, who is on management, who's on management of the board of the African Travel and Tourism Association. I'd like to welcome you, my panel. How are you guys this evening?
Very good.
So I did briefly mention what you guys do, but I'd like to start with Beks. If you could all individually just tell our viewers this evening what it is that you do and a little bit about yourselves. Can we start with Beks?
Thank you very much. So Beks Ndlovu from African Bush Camps. I'm the founder and CEO of the company. We basically are a safari and tourism operator operating in Zimbabwe, Botswana, and Zambia. We operate safari camps in remote locations. And we have a sales and marketing team based in South Africa in Cape Town, where I'm currently under lockdown.
We all are. Yeah. Let's head on over to you, Juliet. Can you tell the viewers a little bit about what you do and yourself?
Yes, well, I've been a journalist for 2.5 decades, I guess. I have recommended I hope I've navigated people to the best hotels across the world for the last 20 years. I was one of the founders of Mr. and Mrs. Smith, which is boutique hotel guides. But in recent years, I've been much more focused on sustainability and celebrating businesses such as many of the ones that we'll talk about today that aren't just luxury destinations, but have a positive impact, and we'll need that more than ever. So hello from London.
Hello. And we'll move over to you, Nigel. Can you tell the viewers a little bit about what you do and yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Nigel. I'm a hotelier by trade. I've also been a tour operator. I founded ATTA, the African Travel and Tourism Association, 26 years ago, I think now. And we've grown to about 650 members in 21 countries in Africa. And our membership is roughly half suppliers, so hotels, lodges, camps, right across Africa, mostly sub-Saharan Africa. We don't really have many in West Africa. And then the buyers globally. Obviously, our biggest amount of buyers is in the UK, but then we have buyers all over the rest of the world.
Lovely. So we are sort of living in uncertain times. I think all four of us can agree. All our viewers can agree. And I think when I was asked to come on board to facilitate, I always thought to myself that as an end user, I have my own perspective of how we're going to get affected. But I think professionally, a lot of people are wanting to know and understand what is the future of travel and tourism post-COVID-19. So I've got a couple of questions, and I'm going to direct them to all three of you. So the first question is, how do you see travel changing in the short to long term, especially to long-haul destinations such as Africa? We're going to start with Beks. Beks, could you answer the question, please?
I'm in the firing line here. It looks like you're starting with me. Yeah, look, I mean, so firstly, there's one declaration that I'd like to make, okay, in that I'm not a doctor, I'm not a scientist, and neither a politician. I think we can all agree that whatever we discuss on this forum, really it's from speculation and is derived from the information that we have today. So I think we can really only comment based on our knowledge of the current situation. Now, we also know that from the day COVID-19 hit the news, the dynamics have been changing, not just weekly, but daily. And it could be that in 4 weeks' time, in 3 months' time, it's a whole different scenario, and we'll look back at this and say, what the hell were we talking about? So yeah, I just thought that's probably the baseline that we should start having this conversation. And certainly what would be good would be to give perspective of what's happening in our business at African Bush Camps between the 3 countries where we have our camps. We employ over 600 people between the 4 countries. And certainly, between the 4 countries, people are working, but on certainly reduced time. I mean, the number of people in our camps in terms of staff, there's probably about 25% of our staff that are on site 2 weeks at a time, because the work just isn't there. But, you've got these assets that are sitting and need to be looked after. So all the maintenance is being done, and some of the staff are being upskilled. So things like waiters and bedroom hands, and people that don't normally go out on game drives are getting opportunities with the professional guys to go on game drives if they have an interest. And we're using that as a platform to upskill some of those guys and give them an understanding of what our guests' experiences are and what it's all about. But at the same time, we've got these vast wilderness areas that no longer have surveillance, and these areas become quite vulnerable to illegal activities. So there's all of these dynamics that have taken over. And certainly for our sales and marketing teams, I mean, we're working probably harder today than we've ever worked, because not only are we dealing with the whole dilemma of postponing and dealing with people's concerns, but we're also trying to get out of the survival stage mentality and say, what does recovery actually look like? So I mean, I think that's probably what I'll say for now. Nigel, I don't know what, from your perspective, you're in the source markets. The UK is a big chunk of our business, and certainly it's the golden question is, when will people start traveling? I think it's safe to say that with the hands of scientists, doctors, and world governments.
Yeah, Beks, I mean, I agree with you that we aren't scientists, and it's very difficult because we can only go back over the past and see what's happened in the past and how we've recovered. We've seen a series of things like 9/11. We've had the 2008 recession. We've had a series of non-essential travel warnings, and it's always been that the industry has bounced straight back in a sort of V, straight up back where it was. And I think that at the start of all this was our hope, and I see a lot online about, as soon as it's over at the end of the year or beginning that, it's going to come bouncing back. I really don't think I can spread that message any longer. I have to be positive. I represent members all over Africa, but I think we have to be realistic. It isn't going to happen quickly. It's going to be a long, long haul. One tour operator or DMC based in South Africa sent me an email today saying that he doesn't see it coming back strongly until 2022. So it's going to be a long, long, long journey. And we have to work very, very hard now with the consumers to persuade them to come back to the Africa that we love. But it's going to be a lot of work.
I completely agree with you. I think we're torn between wanting to be optimists and being accused of being pessimists if we're being realists. And I think what we have to accept right now, in order, just as you say, is think about the future. And we will never go back to how it was. So we have to make a plan for how it will be. And as you say, we don't know. I'm fairly confident travel will shrink beyond all of our comprehensions. I'm so sorry, it breaks my heart to say that. I'm someone I don't work in the travel industry, but I observe all of it. And I think the fact is that's very sad for 10% of the world's workforce works in tourism, so 1 in 10 people. However, when it comes, with anything, quality products or quality travel experiences will still be in demand. And actually, I think the demand will outweigh the supply. And that's not, your average consumer wouldn't be able to get their heads around that. But the fact is, with British Airways, as we know this week, announcing, I speak, from the UK, how many people they've made redundant, the actual availability of flights will go down 22%. So you simply will not have the access. But I do think people will spend this time planning so much more. I hope we don't have to wait till 2022 for you to see them returning to Africa. I'm pretty confident beginning of next year. I have friends ringing me every day talking about January, February. So you just need to be there in their awareness now and giving them inspiration to dream and showing them why. But I'm afraid to say, you know, short term, no, there's just no international travel.
That actually filters through into my next question. And I think we're speaking about being optimistic, but also being very realistic, which is what we need to do. How slow do you think that the recovery process will be? I'll start with you, Nigel.
Well, I think, as I said, I think it's going to be much slower than we've been expecting in the past. I mean, there's so many considerations here, apart from the normal sort of one of persuading people to go on safari or whatever, in the ways that we've done it in the past. You've got to remember what's happening at home. I mean, people haven't had that. They've had their children sitting around them now for months. The schools haven't gone back, and probably won't go back in UK till September at the earliest. And all that has got to be, you know, are people going to start planning a holiday without getting their children back to school, or all that sort of thing? Family matters sorted? No, they're not. And so I think it's going to take much longer for the market to come back than we think, for all those sort of reasons. And of course, what we have to do now is to work on recovery projects, which we've done in the past, to get the word out that Africa is open for business. But it will take some time. And as you were saying earlier, you know, tourism depends on open skies. It depends on being able to get there. And with the current aviation situation as it is, I don't think you're going to see the international carriers coming back, say, to South Africa in anything. I mean, certainly not on a daily basis, maybe on a twice weekly basis. I think you're going to see prices shoot up from the average price of an international flight from, say, UK to South Africa is about £500-600 now. We're talking maybe about between £800-900 to £1,000 if they're only going to run twice a week. And secondly, as again you said, BA is in big trouble. So is Virgin, they fly there, and South African Airways. I mean, we've got the main carriers, who's all right up in the question mark. So a lot of the recovery is depend on whether you can get to the destinations.
Can I just add as well, not to forget with aviation, we don't know how they're going to modify their actual planes, and their load will be half the load because people will not want to be near other people, which means, of course, the prices will go up because, you know, that's how it goes. So it's going to become prohibitively expensive for some people.
All right, Beks, would you like to add on to that?
Yeah, look, I certainly agree with both Juliet and Nigel about that scenario, which is pretty bleak, really, for us as an industry. So I agree that is a possible scenario that we're looking at, and certainly for our business, we're planning for the worst case scenario. So I would be lying if I say those aren't some of the discussions in the boardroom. But however, there is another flip side of the coin that I want to maybe bring into the discussion here, in that, again, I started off about talking about, you know, the world leaders today are making decisions based on what they know. It's safe to say that what we know about COVID-19 is constantly changing and evolving as, you know, scientists get and researchers unearth what this is all about. There could be a possibility where the spin or the news on COVID-19 takes a shift, in that actually maybe it's not what we thought it might be. I mean, I get accused of being an eternal optimist for the most part, but that's me, and I certainly hope that's many of us, especially our audience out there. But it could be that the discussion really takes a complete shift around what COVID-19 really is, and it might be that you might have an aircraft that houses people that want to continue social distancing, or you might have an aircraft that is exactly the same as it's always been, and you're told, if you want to go to Africa, this is the price for flight A, this is the price for flight B, and you pick your choice. And then it'll be up to individual choices as to how you travel, where you travel to. And I said, just like there are different products in terms of Africa, you know, you've got backpackers, you've got self-drives, you've got lodges, you've got camps, and people would be able to choose their product according to their preferred practice or way of operating. So it could be that that we might get to that. And if you want to pay $20,000 for a flight to Africa, then you go on a particular flight and you go to particular camps. It might be that, we don't know. And I think a shift in places like Europe that are rapidly starting actually to shift gears and say, okay, well, we're going to start opening up certain businesses, including restaurants. We'll continue social distancing, but they are making moves to show that there are some changes amiss. And this is why I say, in 3 months' time, are we going to look back at this conversation and say, what were we talking about? What are the possibilities that we didn't consider? But certainly, I'm not advocating that there'll be a scenario where we're all taking to the next person with COVID-19 and giving them a kiss so that we can, be done with it. But who knows? These are all the possibilities that will be unearthed over time.
True. Just a reminder to all the viewers to keep the questions coming in the comment section. Speaking of which, one question did come through from the viewers, and the question is, do we know what the situation is with local pilots who are essential for getting customers to camps? I'm going to start with, because I'm trying to juggle it around. Juliet, you can answer this one first.
I actually am probably the least qualified to answer that, but thank you so much. I think probably it would be Beks. Yeah,
let's answer that.
Look, I mean, we as African bush camps, as part of our business, run a business called Safari Logistics in Zimbabwe, where we actually have planes on the ground in Victoria Falls. We've got planes on the ground in Harare. And part of our business is getting people around to these remote locations, not just for our own camps, but even for our competitors, etc. So again, that question really is determined by what the World Health Organizations are going to give out through the civil aviation that govern the international scene, how that actually materializes. And where it starts with that is that World Health Organizations and various civil aviation authorities will actually issue out guidelines as to how airlines should operate. And those guidelines will in turn have to be embraced by people like us on the ground. Obviously, there are limitations in that the aircrafts that we use are light aircrafts, 6-seaters, some of the smaller ones, and then the other ones are 12 seats. And there will be a form of a dictation of some sort as to what is the safest way for us to move passengers from point A to B. And again, with things rapidly changing, it might be that there is a way that you can test efficiently and very quickly whether someone has it or not. And maybe even the time lag of maybe it might be a test that can detect it whether it's still in incubation or not. And I think kind of rollouts of this technology, it might negate all the things that we're talking about, and maybe those aircrafts might, I hope, might not have to endure the changes, the configurations. But we're really at the mercy of the World Health Organizations and our governments in terms of how we go forward with transporting people. So at this stage, all our planes, like everywhere else, are parked, and our pilots are on extended leave. And they're on standby for some kind of direction from authorities as to what the future actually looks like for pilots in small aircrafts.
Can I just slightly off piece actually and ask Beks a question, because I see it's not coming up. Beks, do you think there's any prospect of moving towards more domestic tourism in the meantime to keep your staff happy and to keep the salaries coming, being able to pay the salaries, keep some income coming in, or is that out of the question for your type of operation?
So Nigel, we've always encouraged local and regional tourism, but obviously, that does not sustain the level of costs for businesses like ours. We've got huge big costs in not just maintaining these very rapidly deteriorating assets in this climate, but we also have these vast wildlife conservation areas that need policing. There are communities alongside of it that we are embracing and taking along with us to become custodians of the environment, the wildlife, the land. It's an enormous cost that local and regional travel will not be able to sustain. And as you know, we do have soft prices for locals just to encourage local people as part of the effort to get their buy-in to be resourceful and also take care of our own environment. And those soft rates that we send out there, particularly for our products, local and regional people, it's still quite a lot of money. And particularly, with people being affected, yes, there'll be people that have got allocations and resources to travel, but it will be limited. I think we'll see more and more locals really keeping travel local. And I suspect it's going to be the same situation in the UK, in Australia, parts of Europe, where people will travel locally. So absolutely, local and regional traffic, it's a business that we'll definitely pursue. We always have. And hopefully that helps at least, turn the wheels.
Oh, thanks, yeah.
And Juliet, would you like to add on to that?
I was just really thinking more, we were talking about aviation and they were asking about local flights and pilots. I think what we'll see a big shift globally is obviously an emphasis on private travel. So people not wanting to take commercial connections. And so there will be that demand as we come out of this for private travel and smaller planes. If that's relevant to the person who asked the question, obviously that depends on the sector, the audience that you're looking at. So the high net worth particularly, I think that's going to be very popular. That was just a sort of side note.
All right. And since we did speak about the importance of remaining optimistic, although we should be realistic at all times, what are the positives that could come out of the situation?
Shall I answer? I do, even though I sound, all doom and gloom, I'm very positive, actually. Somebody who talks about sustainability specifically, and obviously sustainability by definition is looking at man's sort of impact on the earth, what natural resources we're going through. In the short term, we won't have sufficient funds or revenue for conservation, which is heartbreaking. However, just letting nature have a breather, as we're all seeing, and we're all taking this moment, this time to recalibrate, has been precious. And I think with sustainable travel, obviously, we really want people to travel around the world less, but travel better. So low volume, high impact in the positive impact sense, and high spend. So less people spending more, less encroaching on nature, less. So I feel very positive from a sustainability point of view, but that's a very privileged perspective because it's talking about the luxury travel sector. Mass tourism will be greatly affected.
True. Nigel, would you like to add on to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously the reduction in global carbon emissions is a huge point, and whether that's going to stay or not. I mean, I think that transport is about 26% of global carbon emissions, and the clearest skies I've ever seen actually is in Botswana in the Kalahari at night, absolutely clear. And funnily enough, we're getting that now in UK. I've never seen the sky look as blue as it's looked, the air as clear as it looked. And it's a massive change, and one just sees actually what these Greta Thunberg has been talking about. You can see that no cars, no transport, and we get clearer air, and everybody feels a lot better. So I think let's hope that we can keep some of that down. I think people might travel a bit less. I think positives will be that we've seen with the advent of the internet and sort of online stuff we're doing now. We don't need so much travel. I have a board of directors based all across Africa, in South Africa and Southern Africa and Kenya. And up to now, we've always met at the various trade shows, and people have flown in for the board meetings and we paid for their tickets. We're now doing it Zoom online, and it works just as well, if not better. And I think those sort of changes will continue. I think people will do less commuting. I mean, we're even discussing whether we really need an office. We're all working from home, and I think some of the bigger companies I've talked to are saying, well, we'll probably reduce our office staff by about 50%, same number of people, but people will be working from home. So I think that's all a good point.
And Beks, would you like to wrap up on that?
Yeah, look, I mean, I agree definitely on both accounts. I think we've now been put in a situation where we have to question the old norm and embrace the new norm. And part of that is, do people need to commute and be stuck in traffic for 2 to 3 hours every single day? Carbons, and it's just such a waste of productive time. But I just want to emphasize on what Juliet was saying about environmentally. It's just amazing how the environment has very quickly responded in terms of how robust it is. Now, of course, the converse side of it is that it's also demonstrating how not robust we as human beings are. And I certainly, as human beings, we will not exercise our short-term memories and just revert back to old practices, which often is the case. But as it may, I'm hopeful we will all be a lot more conscious and aware of how much of a consumptive species we are, and that we'll make certain decisions that will hopefully hold us a bit more accountable and responsible for the way in which we live our lives. But particularly what I'm also very pleased to see is just the rate and acceleration of technology that we've been able to take advantage of, where we're able to connect with our close friends, families, and business colleagues a lot better. I think that human element of communication is really going to open up. I don't know if you've had sundowners and dinners on Zoom.
I haven't. But I'm yearning for an invite, like somebody invite me already.
Things that I didn't think about or even conceive 3 months ago.
True. All right, another question which I'd like the three of you to answer. What do you think the impact will be on different generations of travelers? We can start with Juliet.
Well, thank you. I mean, I think people's perspectives are very different. And I think for me, I would imagine this is one of the most important topics to address right now, because I really think that, it will bounce back much more for younger travelers who aren't as concerned about health. And they're much more gung-ho, and they will get back on those planes. They won't be so particular, I'm guessing. Whereas, as we know in travel, particularly with safaris and luxury, it's the 50 plus who have the biggest spend. And without them, you're going to see a huge drop in revenue. And they're going to be the ones who are much more nervous about traveling long haul. So you're going to need to be able to reassure them of flexibility, health and safety, or your cleaning protocols, all those things. Otherwise, they just probably won't take the risk to leave their own country or their own continent. So I would say it's really significant thinking about generations when it comes to looking at the future and the mindset of the different ages.
Nigel, would you like to add on?
Yeah, I think all the generations are sort of taking stock. If you look at sort of my generation, the sort of baby boomers, for the first time we've had to embrace the internet. We've got quite techie now, and we're getting quite good at it. And so that's changing our lives, and that's changing the way we'll book and the way we'll go in the future. I think the next one down, which is Generation X, isn't it? And I think they're a generation that saw 9/11 and they saw 2008 recession, and they're now sort of getting to the sort of top of their professions, and they're in their mid-40s, that sort of thing. And I think they're going to take stock and think, well, where's this? I think everybody's had a huge fright, and they're going to say, well, maybe I'm not going to go on trying to make my millions. Maybe I'm going to go and help people. I'm going to be, I'm going to be trying to be helping others and teaching others. I think there could be a lot of changes, and that could also change the markets that we deal in. We might not see so much high spendable income. And then the millennials who, the sort of ones sort of in the late 80s, mid 90s. And I think they were always being the ones that didn't really care. They didn't save. They didn't want houses. Certainly that's been the case with my children. And I think that they're now going to sort of become more stable. I think they're going to try and sort of value saving and that sort of thing. And I think they're going to change and not be quite so irresponsible. And as for the youngest ones, well, it all depends on teaching and universities and that sort of thing, and university grants where they can afford to go. But I think student loans and debts are probably be a thing of the past. They're not going to want to do it. They want to do it online. So all those factors of all the different generations will then feed into what we do, which is travel and tourism, because income sources are going to change. I think there will be a lot of change. True.
Beks, would you like to wrap up?
Yeah, I think Nigel put it very well there. Look, it's I guess the younger people that have never really traveled. The point that I want to emphasize is that I believe that people are going to live certainly for the first few years of their lives before they settle down. This opens up a whole world of being able to live nomadic lives, see the world, and still continue to have your education. As you know, being educated has traditionally meant that you stay in one place for a period of time, and hence the very popular thing of taking a year's break after you finish studying before you take life serious. All those are things of the past. So I think there's definitely a young generation that will be prepared to do it on the cheap in most cases, travel and go around the world whilst they learn. But certainly I agree that the generation that are possibly retired and travel regularly and they feel vulnerable, I think this is a big market that will probably lose in time. And the average age of travelers will probably start to lower as young people decide to take the risk and get into an airplane with the whole group of other people, or go to places that people that feel vulnerable wouldn't necessarily go. So it is also a time where a lot of young people are very socially and environmentally aware and conscious, and I really hope that it's a time when we go forward where we can get people like that thinking positively about ways in which we could all do things better and responsibly towards the environment.
All right, let's say that post COVID-19, sort of everything is lifted, we're allowed to travel, and the first group of people decide to take the risk. From your guys' perspective, what would your advice be to that first group of individuals who are saying we are taking the plunge and we're doing this? Do you want to take it, Juliet?
I can do, absolutely. I think, so again, going back to generations and people, depending on their budgets and their attitudes and where they're coming from in the world, they'll all have a different perspective. I think the one thing that we've learned from all of this, which is also echoing the reasons to be positive, is that we've all learned nature is more important than anything, or we've been reminded nature is everything. And so I think I would hope, and often what I say I think will happen is what I hope will happen, is people will be more mindful of their impact on nature and be more sensitive to that. So they want to get out there, experience nature, whilst exactly, I think you both said, Nigel and Beks, whereas they also want to make sure that they are having a meaningful time away or making a positive contribution. So I would hope that the first wave would be thinking about that. But I do also think they'll want very private escapes. They still won't be ready to, throw themselves into wider
the masses.
Yeah.
Would you like to add on to that, Beks?
No, I think Juliet has got it covered there. Thanks, Sechaba.
Alrighty. I'm going to skip to the next question, which has come through from the viewers section. This one's for Juliet. We're hearing in the media that luxury travel will be less affected and quicker to recover. Do you agree with this? And if so, why?
I think that the luxury sector certainly, and I think that will be more robust. I think if you looked at projections of travel, as we know in the industry in January, before we had any idea of this happening, the projected growth in luxury travel was already going to be huge. I think that people, as we say, they will be traveling less, but be traveling better. So it will be about quality, not quantity.
Yes.
Yeah. And so I think it is going to be the sort of mid-market and lower down in travel that will suffer more. I just really hope with luxury travel, people will go for the assurances, like we said, in terms of luxury travel, known brands, the assurances of safety. It'll be if they're, more risk-free. But I also think people will be much more discriminating about what luxury means, you know, rather than just going for how it gave them added comforts or it was 5-star perks. I think they'll look at that luxury product and think, who am I giving my money to? Where is it going? And what is being done with that? So I hope that people will be more discriminating, and sustainable luxury hopefully will be the one that flourishes.
True. Nigel, this one's for you. What are the biggest concerns that you've seen from your members, and what are the steps the tourism providers taken to prepare for recovery?
I think the biggest concern at the moment, which is the hot topic, is about cancellation fees and how people get refunded. And there's an ongoing debate going on with our industry, which needs, I think, to reform quite dramatically for the future. This is all about the consumer, the end consumer, who wants to cancel their holiday because they can't go on it, because you can't leave UK, for instance, as a non-essential travel warning to leave the country. The holiday cannot be provided by, say, Beks and his company. So what happens is the UK tour operator has taken the money, and he or has taken a deposit, but in most cases the full amount. And that goes down through the chain, through what you would call probably ground operators, we call DMCs, with the local operators within each centre that arrange transport and all that sort of thing, and a lot of the accommodation, and then on to the end supplier, who is the hotel, lodge and camp. Where the whole system seems to have gone wrong is that there is a problem with deposits, because the UK government has made an announcement today, which we have put out to our members, that basically saying that the consumer is entitled to a full refund of everything, including the deposit. And the deposit was, there was no cancellation. The deposit's non-refundable. The tour operators and the suppliers have already said it's a non-refundable deposit, and therefore we're not going to refund it. And the government has said it's got to be refunded, and they are backing that with the EU travel package regulations, which virtually says the same thing. It's very, very controversial now, because the bottom line is that if you take the money away from Beks's camp, so we sent down a deposit to him, he has nothing really left to get everything organized, to pay his staff. He loses that sort of cash flow. So if you give the whole lot back, the system doesn't really work. But you can see that the consumer has a point. They don't understand that. They want all their money straight back. So it's a debate. It's something that we've got to tackle. We've seen it happen before. We've seen it happen after 9/11. We saw it happen at the Ash Cloud, and we didn't, as an industry, do anything about it. But I think in the future, and I hope Beks will agree, we really got to sit down now with all parties and discuss a way forward to get around this problem, so that the consumer feels that he can go on safari without any concern. But I've seen an email in the last 2 hours following a big meeting that was online meeting that was held earlier today, saying that the consumers are now so concerned that they're not going to get their money back, that they're going to book closer and closer and closer to departure. And the latest one today was within 6 days of departure, because they're too frightened otherwise of losing their money. So it's a problem, and we've, as an industry, we've got to sort it out.
Well, you said, sorry, if I can just say as a journalist, well, the most important thing is communication and the nuance of language and the different audiences. And I was one of the people to really shout about the delay, don't cancel or postpone, don't cancel at the very beginning of this through Condé Nast Traveller magazine, who I write for, because I think if you appeal to the right people and the right audience, they understand the bigger picture. But your average consumer, which is what you're talking about with the package holiday regulation in the UK, is consumer rights are you get everything back. But if you say to them, look, when you invest in a trip with us, this is where your money goes, and you show them the economic nutrition of what you're selling, they're more sensitive and understand. And that's a brand's responsibility to communicate what they stand for, and hope that your strong relationships with your individual clients will be more sympathetic. I found most people very, very sympathetic at the beginning of this when it came to postponing their trips rather than cancelling, because they wanted to support the likes of Beks and all the projects, and they understood what it was that they were saving.
But this isn't all about big players like TUI and British Airways, who are refusing to give any cash back at all, and are now doing vouchers which actually aren't backed on anything. They're not backed by insurance. And I spoke to one of my members today who's got a BA, and I've got a BA ticket, which they are actually refusing to refund. And that's really what the government is aiming at today. It's not really the small operator. It's because these big players are refusing to play a game. It's really destroying our industry, and it's destroying our name. As you say, we've got to get our brand tourism back online.
Beks,
Beks, would you like to add on to that?
So no, I was just going to say on Juliet's point of it's really our responsibilities as brands to educate our clients and also to be doing business with people that understand the cost and the ramification of what it means to run these conservancies and wilderness areas. I mean, one of the things, so we probably have had, pretty much 99% support from most of our trade in terms of just really rallying behind us and saying postpone, don't cancel, because actually at the end of the day, the thing to emphasize is that the cost of what you're paying for when you come on safari with us, the cost of putting wine on the table and food on the table is the smallest cost. It's the preparation upfront, upskilling people and communities in a skill set in order to be able to deliver that product. And to continue to upskill them, but more than that, it's to look after the environment so that the product can actually perform, and that's where the huge big costs are. And so people generally understand, they sympathize, and people want the product to be there in the future. But I think certainly there's more and more that we need to get out there and lobby governments in Europe, in places as ATTA with a very strong membership. Various other organizations were saying, we do need to lobby governments in Europe and various places like that to actually look at these laws and consider both sides and ensure that we can come with some kind of balance. Because with having the inability to look after these environments, which, by the way, contributes significantly to climate change and by reducing it. I mean, if we don't look after these assets, the ramification of not doing that is going to be far larger than the consequences of COVID-19. So I think it really is a responsibility that we have to drive this message back home to the source markets and say that it is a collective responsibility that we need to focus on.
All right, just a word of advice. This one also came through from the comment section. What advice can each of you give for prospective travelers concerned about post-lockdown drawbacks? Anything they can look out for, better research, better planning? I think, Nigel, you can answer first.
Yeah, I didn't quite understand the question.
So what advice can you give to prospective travelers concerned about post-lockdown drawbacks? So anything that they need to look out for, basically better research or planning, etc.
Yes, I think the first post-lockdown, which is going to vary from country to country. And I think it looks like UK is going to be last out. I think South Africa's coming out already, aren't they?
Yes.
And I think the drawbacks are lockdown is everybody's been cooped up for so long together that they just can't wait to get out. And they really do want to get out and get going. But they need to, they need to plan very, very carefully itineraries and costs and that sort of thing before sort of jumping too quickly. I think it's going to be a gradual, as I say, a gradual return. So they just take caution, think clearly what you're trying to do, where you want to go to, and whether it's within your budget, and go slowly that way.
I remember, Beks, you said something about the fact that the World Health Organization is obviously just leading the conversation in terms of where this is going, and we need to lean towards experts, and this is purely our opinion. But as part of African bush camps, how will you be receiving people post-COVID-19? Is there anything that you can say from that perspective?
So I think we're at a period in time now, Sechaba, where we really need to drive the message home about the conscious traveler, which really is something that we've tried to focus in trying to get. We believe that if we target conscious travelers, people that are spending their monies, their monies are going to be employed into the right places, such as the environment and communities that really need it, communities that are the true custodians of these areas and the wildlife. So I think just on that last question that you asked, Nigel, I think that really should be the key focus for us. There's a lot of research, there's a lot of planning that has to go into place, but also there's a lot of Africa experts in the source markets who've invested a huge amount of time and in acquiring this knowledge, in knowing who's who on the ground and who is doing the right thing and the responsible thing for the good of the whole world. So really, I believe that is the core focus and message that that we should all be putting out there.
Right. One thing I've really seen in this time, I think it's really shown a lot of us, is the value of excellent travel agents. And I think anyone who had trips booked for April or March, anyone who was in the hands of a great travel agent who was able to go above and beyond, reschedule it, move it, pull strings here and there, I think we're going to go back to using very trusted travel designers, travel agents. I think your average consumer, whereas in the past we would go online, do everything ourselves, I think we want to be in a safe pair of hands. So my advice would be, take advice from an independent travel agent. I know that a lot of us are obviously work within the industry, but just ramping up that message, that how value, they'll know, terms of insurance policies, they'll be familiar with T&Cs there. Different countries have different border policies, all changing all the time. So I think that's, not try and do it all up.
I think that our industry, suppliers, the hotels, lodges and camps, need to keep the tour operators informed of what changes they are making so that they can make those decisions. And I think that's actually a very important point, Juliet, because I was just thinking that if they don't let them know we've done this change and that change and this is what we're going to do as a result of it, they won't get the business. So
that's absolutely right. But on that as well, Nigel, like I was saying earlier on, the dynamics of this are very important to pay attention to, in that there are constant changes happening. What might be a deep clean today might be different in its definition of that tomorrow. So I think, again, it may be premature, and I was having this conversation with my business partner yesterday about it, is that everybody's so hungry and so eager to know what the layout of the land looks like if people had to travel tomorrow. And it's difficult to say because, do we invest in a whole bunch of stuff to mitigate and separate people and all of this, and then the recommendations by the time they roll out in 2 months' time, 3 months' time, it's something completely different. There's a cost implication to being able to put these changes and actually implement the things that are recommended by the authorities.
As an outsider and someone who works in branding and communications, I think radical transparency is what you need. So you need to be, it's almost not what the nitty gritty is. You just need to be heard talking about it. And almost just as we are now, talking on your website, we're always exploring the latest things just to be seen, to be talking about it. And, when it comes to any purchasing decision, as we know anyway with advertising and marketing and consumer goods, 80% of that decision is emotional. So if you're ticking all the boxes anyway and saying, here's all the basic hygiene and all of that, you still really want to be communicating to people with these heartwarming stories of the positive impact you're having, more than anything, not just ticking all the safety and flexibility. That's a given, those boxes. But you've got the most wonderful stories.
I think it's going to be quite interesting to see what the tourist boards are able to do, because governments have had to put in so much money saving the day, as we know, millions and millions of pounds. And of course, a tourist board is an arm of government, and they may not get any budgets to do recovery projects that we've seen in the past. Certainly over the years, particularly in Kenya, which has seen more travel advisors than virtually any other country, they've always come back because of massive recovery projects being financed by the tourist boards. And I think that probably won't happen now. So I think it's going to be left to the private sector. Would you agree with that, Beks?
Yeah, I'd say you're probably right. Our governments in our part of the world have not had the capacity or the resources to step in during COVID-19. So there's definitely not going to be any resources to put towards that in the future. So I think it's really down to private enterprise to make that mandate at the end of the day.
All right. I think in terms of closing, what I'd personally like to hear from you as individuals playing your part individually in the tourism industry is, where do you see us post-COVID-19, and where do you see the tourism industry headed? Beks, do you want to go first?
I'm sorry, you froze there on my camera for a second. So can you ask the question again?
So I'm basically taking closing statements where we agreed on being optimistic. I just want to know that from you guys as individuals and the roles that you play individually in the tourism industry, we're coming out of this, we're on the other side. What do you hope would have happened post-COVID-19?
So I guess mine is emotive to a certain extent, that as human beings, we really become very conscious and very aware and make decisions based on the betterment of our environment, the betterment of us as individuals, in that all the decisions that we continually make each day affect not only ourselves, but the health of the environment and everybody around us. So I really hope that this experience is not something that is a short-term, something that lives in people's short-term memories, but actually something that becomes people's routines. In businesses around town, people to challenge each other and say, in these forums, what are we doing? Small little steps, whether it's making sure that you recycle in your office, making sure that you procure from the right vendors that are doing the responsibly things. It's all about weaving all our stories so that we're all making responsible decisions for the betterment of our environment, because as we've seen, we all really have a part to play in it, regardless of where you're located, where you live. We can influence the outcome of things like COVID-19 in the future.
And Juliet, would you like to add on to that?
Thank you, Beks. That was very inspiring and a big reminder. I think you're exactly right. Every single time we make a decision, as we always say in sustainability, you're essentially taking a vote for the world that you want to live in, every decision. And I think if we can all just take that extra moment, whether we're choosing to buy something or recommend something that somebody else buys, take a moment to think, what is the right thing? What is the better thing for everyone? And looking at supply chains, and really, just like we do with food, we've come to sort of look at the ingredients of what we're eating, everything that we choose or buy, just thinking, what are the ingredients? This is a good business. I'm going to support them. This is, and navigating our way with that as our compass. And I think that's very powerful. And if everyone can just always think about the long term and the bigger picture, then that's a huge change, and being less individualistic. That's a wonderful thing.
True. Nigel, would you like to wrap up?
I just hope that we can get the industry back to where it was before. It's so, I think people have to understand how important all the conservation efforts that are made in Africa and how they depend on tourists. And just looking at the conservancies and that sort of model where the local community are involved, they depend so much on tourists. Without the tourists, there won't be any conservancies, which means there will be less game. The whole thing's a rapid decline if tourism doesn't get back to the levels it was. So we've got to persuade people to get back to the Africa that we love and restore it to the levels it was before.
Lovely. I'd like to thank you guys so much for an enlightening talk. I certainly have learned a lot as an end user, even though I'm not directly linked to the tourism industry. I've come out of this conversation sort of understanding a lot and learning a lot from you guys. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, and just a reminder to the viewers, you can keep the comments coming in the comment section, and we'll attend to the questions on the Facebook page. So thank you so much. Thank you to African Bush Camps. Thank you to Juliet, to Nigel, and to Beks, and have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thanks, Eric.
Awesome.
I've just seen all the comments.